So today's episode of the R2 podcast is a first and a unique one. We had a roundtable discussion with all of us present here in studio. Myself, John, Troy, Dave, Scott, and Amanda. We talked about things that were going on in our respective fields of expertise. It is a timely episode for sure. So as it gets released, I encourage you to listen to it and re-listen to it. There's some great information. And again, there are some deadlines with respect to some of the information that was shared. So I encourage you to listen to it ASAP. But a brief little summary, I personally spoke a little bit about some changes happening in California with respect to medical malpractice law. Actually, it's been decades in the making, so I'm glad it finally has seen the light of day and again, some good information for you to digest there. Scott went into our local real estate market, talked a lot about inventory, rising rates, what to expect, or what advice he would give to first-time home buyers who may have been priced out of the market lately. So some good words of wisdom there. Troy Burden, our insurance guy, went into a lot of employee benefit trends for 2022, as well as an upcoming important Cal Savers deadline. Again, John Duffield, our CPA, went over e142. And then again, there's some June deadlines coming up. So I encourage you, if that's something that may be applicable to you and might save you a little money in taxes, I encourage you to, again, listen to John's segment towards the end and, heed the deadlines. Amanda came in and spoke a little about some 1099K forms and how it will affect business owners that are paid through third-party apps. And then Dave Plivelich took us home by explaining how the supply chain issues are affecting the marketing industry. So all in all, was a wonderful episode. I was glad to be a part of it. I think it's one that you're going to want to listen to a few times to digest everything that we discussed. Enjoy the show.
Welcome back to the Our 2 Cents podcast, the show where your local professionals sit down with an array of guests to hear their story and impart some wisdom for both business and life-improving skills. This is your place to hear business and community leaders discuss relevant topics that matter to you.
And welcome back to the special edition of the R2 podcast. Before we get into today's episode, I encourage you to look back at our last episode and take a listen. Scott Hanson interviewed Key Budge, a Tehachapi City Community Engagement Specialist. Very interesting episode. A lot of stuff going on in Tehachapi. So I encourage you to listen on that one. Make sure to follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. Check out our webpage. You can subscribe to our newsletter, find out about upcoming guests, and offer your own ideas for guests that you'd like to hear us interview on the podcast. So today's episode is going to be a unique one. We're going to start doing this 2, 3, 4 times a year. And it's actually all of the co-hosts in the studio together. And we're going to kind of bring our listeners up to date on what's going on in our respective professional worlds. So today in studio, I have Dave Plivelich with the Marcom Group, Troy Burden, your insurance guy, John Duffield, CPA. And we have Amanda DiGiacomo of Atlas Financial Solutions and Scott Hanson, your real estate guru. So today I wanted to bring to your guys' attention something that's going on in my world first and foremost, and that is a change in medical malpractice law under AB 35. And what that effectively does is in 1976, Governor Jerry Brown signed a law called MICRA, which capped the pain and suffering, what we call general damages, in medical malpractice cases to $250,000. It also limited the amount attorneys can charge in attorney's fees, and it also gave defendants in these cases, doctors, hospitals, providers, the ability to annuitize the payments in a settlement or a judgment against them. So it was a very uphill battle for plaintiffs for the last 4 or 5 decades. And finally, we got some change, and that's coming starting in 2023. And what it does is it changes the cap from 250 to 350, which is not a huge jump, but at least it is a jump. And then from there, it goes up to 750 over a course of a 10-year period. It changes the percentage that attorney can charge in attorney's fees, which gives attorneys more economic incentive to actually take these cases and help injured patients. And it also increases the amount of the award before the defendant can annuitize the payments. This was something that was struck as a deal between various interest groups in Sacramento. Plaintiffs, attorneys have been trying to get this accomplished for the last 10, 15 years through propositions that don't ever pass the ballot. So this was kind of a deal that was struck to avoid having to defend another proposition that was going to come up in November of 2022 to, again, try to change this micro law from 1976. So kind of a deal struck on both sides, from doctors, insurance companies, to the politicians, to the plaintiffs' attorneys, and kind of got together and tried to be reasonable with it. So I'm happy to see that. And, a lot of you guys are numbers guys in here and gals. And if you think about what $250,000 was worth in 1976, if you just index it for inflation, it'd be over $1 million. So we're still kind of behind the curve, but at least it's a step in the right direction, in my opinion.
This is medical malpractice.
Medical malpractice only.
So this would apply when something medically went wrong during a procedure.
Sure.
Not necessarily some injury outside of a hospital or medical setting, right?
Yeah. So like let's say, for example, you're visiting a family member who's at the hospital and someone mopped the floor and didn't put a sign up, and then you slipped and you were injured. That wouldn't be a malpractice claim. That would just be your basic personal injury claim. So it wouldn't fall under this MICRA. It has to do with medical services provided. So, wrong procedure done, incorrect procedure done, misdiagnosis, failure to diagnose, something that requires a medical opinion or profession to actually cause the negligence.
Kyle, why do you think it took so long to change that?
Doctors, companies, insurance companies have had a lot of pull in Sacramento.
It's all your fault, Troy.
Yep.
And what's interesting is that we've had a Democratic legislator for a long time. We've had a supermajority of Democrats in our state legislature for the last decade or so. And typically it's the Republicans or conservatives who are big on tort reform and limiting, what people can recover in personal injury cases, not usually Democrats. So it kind of goes to show you how much power these insurance companies had in our state legislature, even though most of them are Democrats, from taking any action over the last, 20, 30, 40 years to get this done.
Shows you a lot of things, actually.
It does, yeah.
Shows you maybe how bought and paid for politicians in general are sometimes.
Yeah,
really. But I don't mean that necessarily derogatory. I'm just saying it is a fact that lobbies in general, whatever side of the aisle you're on, whatever side of the aisle those lobbies are on, they wield a ton of power because they contribute to campaigns. They cause politicians to vote the direction they want them to vote, right?
And guess how they killed the right to repair? The public wanted right to repair, and that got shot down by the legislature. And everybody wanted it.
Yeah.
But it's the lobbyists and the big companies that are paying for that, and they don't want you to repair stuff. They want to sell you something brand new. Something
junky brand new, right? It was a long time coming, and I know it's not a really interesting topic that's probably on the front of everyone's minds because hopefully you or a family member won't experience a malpractice claim. But nonetheless, I thought it's very new and something that's been, a long time coming. So I just wanted to share that and, invite listeners after the fact if they have any questions more about it, want to get more detailed about it, or have questions about malpractice in general, then, they can definitely contact my office directly and I can walk them through that. And actually, same thing with all the topics we're going to have today. If any of the listeners, as we're conversing with all the professionals here, if you want follow-up, if you have some questions, if you need advice, if you are looking to delve further in what we're talking about today, in the show notes, we're going to have all of our contact information, emails, websites, phone numbers, all that good stuff. And I definitely encourage you to reach out and get some more information if you're looking for it. So moving on to our next topic, we're going to talk with Scott Hanson, our local real estate expert guru. Been in the business a very long time, all aspects of real estate, and we're seeing some interesting changes right now. And it's been pretty consistent, I would say, over the last couple of years with respect to where interest rates were, what property values were doing, low inventory, houses, not stay on the market long, but I think we're seeing a little shift, Scott. So tell us a little bit about what you're seeing here locally in the real estate market.
Yeah, I think it's been even more than a couple of years. It's really been about a decade of a Fed policy on interest rates that have certainly fueled a booming real estate market. And right about the time they were going to start to change that policy and start to throttle back on some of that stimulus they were promoting in 2019, shortly thereafter, COVID came along. And that kind of brought the punch bowl back to the party, round 2 or 3 or 4, kind of depending on where you start counting, and another 2 years of really heavy Fed stimulus in the form of both bond buying, mortgage-backed securities buying, and then also interest rate, nearly Fed funds rate nearly at zero for all this time. It was zero for a long time. So the shift that you're talking about, Kyle, is happening. It has been broadcast now for at least the last 6-8 months. I think that a lot of people have been anticipating it a lot longer than 6 or 8 months, but it's certainly starting to take shape now, and we're starting to see some of the repercussions of that. We're seeing the Fed funds rate now up at 1% with projections that it'll go to 2% before the end of the year. There's a lot of different opinions and theories about that. It could not change much. It could change even more drastically than that. But what that means for mortgage rates is that they will hover a few points above that Fed funds rate as a margin above that. Typically, right now we're seeing interest rates in the 5s, mid-5s. Just 8-9 months ago, we were seeing them under 3. And for a long time, they were under 3. So does that change the outlook for your real estate values, the amount of real estate transactions going on? Yeah, I think it has a lot of different rippling effects that we're starting to see signs of. For example, inventory is growing. So we've had less than, we talk in terms of months of inventory a lot with the number of listings on the market at any given time. And we've been in an environment during the last 2 COVID years where we have consistently had less than a month's worth of inventory at any given time of inventory in active listings locally here. That would mean that if all listings that were currently active sold, they would all sell at the rate they were selling, they would all sell in about a couple weeks is typically what we've seen over the last couple of years. Currently, we just crossed back over a month now. We're at about 5 weeks, almost 6 weeks of inventory sitting on the market right now.
What is that number typically? Locally, what
we're typically
numbers?
Somewhere between 500 and 650 transactions per month. Right now, we're sitting at 650 listings. So,
Okay.
As this is recorded, and last month we sold about 560 in the last 30 days. So that puts us at about that 5 week, 6 week number. That's been consistently growing for about 8 weeks now, and I think that it probably continues to grow. There's just there are naturally going to be less buyers able to afford the price they were paying a year ago, 2 or 3, 4 years ago at lower interest rates. It's an adjustment in people's mindset. It's an adjustment in the sentiment that people have of, let me lock in these 3.5%, 4% interest rates because they may never come back. Now people are looking at 5. We've seen 5 before. 5 is not such a novelty. It's a low rate. It's a very low rate, but it's not as novel as 2.5, which really had never really happened. And so I think that the drive to lock in that low interest rate and get into a purchase almost at any cost has caused people, now there's a little bit more thought that goes into their purchase where they say, well, do we really want to do this? It's not so much interest rate driven as it is this the right place for me? Is this the price I want to pay? Now, despite all that, we're still seeing the same number of transactions transact over the last few months. We're still in that 500 to 600 range per month here in our local Bakersfield market. And there's a lot of buyers who have been waiting on the sidelines for a long time, trying to get into the game of owning a home and have been bid out and not able to do that. I think this creates a lot of opportunity for them. So if the market softens a little bit and sellers get a little bit more eager because they have more competition on the market now, there are more listings, those sellers are naturally going to come off their price a little easier, or they're going to make it a little easier for that buyer to get their offer accepted. And that's going to be great for buyers who've been sitting around for a long time, not sitting around actively trying, but not able to get their offer accepted. Now they're going to have that opportunity to get their offer accepted.
But it's also going to affect the purchasing power, right? Because if at 2.5%, let's say you can qualify for I'm just going to throw it out there, a $2,500 a month payment, what does that look like at 5.5%?
Yeah, it's going to raise payments for the same purchase price that you're going to make. It can be a couple $100. It can be $200-$300, like in the example that you just gave, $400,000 home. Yeah, that can be a good $300 different per month payment wise. Now, so we also have wages on the rise right now. We have low unemployment rate, and that might be teetering too. That might be getting ready to change too, depending on how a lot of economic forces are going to play out. But currently, employees are in the driver's seat in a lot of ways to get that extra money they need per month through raises that would offset some of these interest rate changes. So I think what's fueling a strong market despite these higher interest rates is the fact that people are making more than they were in the last couple of years as well.
And relatively still low inventory.
Very low inventory still. Yeah. So to put it into perspective, in 2019, like November of 2019, before COVID was a thing, and kind of in maybe more what we would have called a normal market, although it was a pretty tight market back then. There were 1,000 listings on the market. There was 2 months worth of inventory. You go back to 2017, it was always hovering between maybe 1,000, 1,400 homes on the market locally, which was about 2 months of inventory, in any given instance in time. But that was kind of considered a normal market at the time. In fact, it was considered a very good market for both buyers and sellers. It was
a fair market.
It was fair. It was probably tilted a little bit to the seller side because sellers were typically getting the price they were listing at, but buyers had a chance to get an offer accepted. And there might have been multiple offers if the house was priced low or right, but there weren't 25 offers. Maybe there were 2. Or 3.
What do you say to a seller right now who lists their home, gets an offer at or near asking price, and is sitting there saying, I wonder if I should wait another 3-4 days and see if I can get someone bidding $20,000, $30,000 over asking price before accepting this offer?
I think I would negotiate seriously, and I would take any offer that you're receiving right now seriously as a seller, aside from a just outright lowball offer, or maybe the property's been on the market for 12, 24 hours. It's a little early to go ahead and just consider any offer. But if your property's been on the market for 3-4 days, it's gone through a weekend where people have the time to go see it. It's not necessarily a holiday weekend, so they've actually had the time to, focus on any home buying interest they have at the time. And you're still not getting some action in that 3 or 4 days. I wouldn't necessarily say lower the price. What I would say is that if you start to get offers in on that 5th, 6th, 7th day, that you should take those very seriously. And even if they're a little off your list price, it's probably worth a return counter, and it's worth a discussion to try to see if there isn't a deal to put together. Because I think the seller that's going to sit there and wait for I'm going to get 5 offers in the next couple of days, I wouldn't say that that's going to be the case as it was even 9-10 months ago.
So the days of listing it and having 6 offers, all of them above asking price within a day or so of listing, those days might be gone for a little while.
I think that's changed. However, I will say that as we do see listings go on, as we see our borrowers who are pre-qualified in our mortgage company go out and go shopping, they are still aggressively offering, meaning that they are typically offering at list price or very near list price. We even see appraisal guarantees. Anybody in the market's familiar with that concept of where they're willing to pay some amount over appraised value in the case of a low appraisal. We're still seeing appraisal guarantees, and it's not maybe as wild as it was, last couple of years, but we'll see $5,000 or $10,000 being thrown around to incentivize the seller to pick their offer. And I think it has a lot to do with the property. If it's a prime property, if it's that perfect location, if it's that rare property that doesn't come up very often in that right price range where everybody's going to want it, then you're still going to be in a multiple offer situation. And as a seller, you're sitting on something that is still very sought after. And I think that that's something else a seller and a buyer can use to try to gauge where they want to be. They can look at what are the number of listings in the immediate market. Am I bidding on a house where there's 4 other listings that are exactly like it, and they've also been sitting on the market for 2 weeks, and they're all priced about the same? The buyer's going to have a lot of leverage in that situation, obviously. In a situation where it's a real specialty property and a lot of people have been waiting for just that type of property to come on the market, that seller's probably still going to be sitting in a pretty good spot to pick and choose their buyer from the multiple offers.
Well, it's not just a specialty property, but I remember it wasn't too long ago where if you had similar homes on the market, you actually cared what one of them looked like compared to the other. Like what did the paint job look like? What amenities did it have? How well kept up it was. It seems like over the last year or so, it just that stuff didn't matter. It's like there was a house on the market, wasn't many. I got to get it quick, so I'm bidding on it to get it. Are we going to see some more change now where it does matter that you've remodeled the bathroom or that you've got a updated kitchen and stuff that typically you would see as increasing home value? Is that going to make more of an impact now for sellers?
So. I think so, and I think that's what I mean by specialty property. I don't necessarily mean
I didn't know if you meant like
kind
that.
of location.
Yeah,
I do mean that as well, but I also mean, are you that one out of those 4 that are identical in square footage and layout, but yours is the one that just got the remodel in the last couple of years and it has the color schemes and everything that's really popular right now and people want? Or are you the one that, hasn't been touched in 25 years? And those buyers are not going to see those 2 properties anywhere near the same right now.
Okay. Amanda, you got a question?
Yeah, from like the millennial buyer standpoint, because I'm a millennial in the room right here, trying to buy my first house, and like all of us are, and we're having a hard time, especially in the last 2 years of being like the prices are just so high because of low inventory, and we're getting outbid, and we just can't, even though wages are increasing, we're still not getting paid those wages to qualify for a $500,000 house when that house was like $200,000 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So what kind of advice do you have for like the millennial group who are like first time home buyers they really want to get into a house and like the changes that are coming?
I would say stay focused on it. Don't lose faith, right? Don't necessarily change your plans because that's not available. Time goes by very quickly, and for the millennial generation, they might think still that a year or 2 is a long time. That goes by snap of the fingers, and 3 or 4 months really goes by quick. And that might be all you need to wait to get that right house that's bound to come on the market at the right price. I think this fall is going to be a big indicator. Right now, we're in our spring and summer buying season. Even in the worst market, spring and summer is always good. People are having to make changes based on kids' school schedules and things like that. It's the time that it's when the weather's nice. It's when open houses do really well. Naturally, right now, we are still in a fast-paced market. I think this fall will be a real important indicator. Come November, holiday season, October, November, holiday season, when people start to take their homes off the markets like they do every year, are buyers going to be fighting over those few listings that are left on the market, or are the buyers also going to kind of leave the market and start to tone it down? And if they do, then I think that's where anybody who's been waiting on the sidelines, Amanda, like you're talking about, and maybe frustrated with that, I think is going to start to get some opportunity. coming up very soon. And the reason why I say stay focused is keep that FICO score high. You know, keep all your finances in order. Keep that down payment. Don't go spending on something. You know, hang on to that down payment. Like, you're going to need it, and it might feel like it's burning a hole in your pocket, but there's going to be an opportunity to use that. And I think if it's not today, if your house isn't on the market right now and you're still getting outbid, give it a few months. Give it the next 6-12 months. I think you might see the opportunity come up.
Scott, what's your take on new home permitting? You have your finger on that? I mean, how do we rank in the nation? I mean, I believe I read something just the other day that Bakersfield is in the top 10 in the nation for new home permits.
You know, you just drive around the outskirts of town.
Yep.
Troy, I mean, housing tracts being developed everywhere on every edge of town in every direction. There's a huge lot shortage for so many years in town that has really driven developers to go all out and try to have plenty of pipeline in front of them to be able to build out. You know, it's tough to speculate right now because we're in this transition as to whether or not they get caught holding the bag, essentially, with a lot of lots that don't get burned through at whatever they're projecting that to be, or if they're doing just the right amount and that we continue in a low unemployment rate environment for a long time where people are continue to be able to afford to buy new construction, resell, and it keeps a strong market despite this interest rate rise. So I think that it's early to say. Do we have too much inventory, I think is what you're asking, and do we have too many new lots coming online that won't get built out the way they think? I don't know. I think we're a little bit early before we can answer that.
So more than likely, there's still probably some waiting list in some of those tracts out there.
There are, but they're seeing real changes too.
Sure.
The types of incentives that they used to give away, are starting to come back a little bit. I mean, there's starting to be some builder incentives where there really didn't need to be over the last few years.
And let's speak about all terms real estate. So what does the rental market look like? I've always been told there's a huge shortage of rental properties in Bakersfield. So
over the last couple of years, it depends on where you are in town, and it depends on what survey or analysis you're looking at, but rents have gone up about 25% over the last couple of years. And so it's anywhere from about 8 or 10% per year to maybe as much as 15 or 18% per year. And like I say, kind of depending on where you're at. Are you a studio or a 3-bedroom? And are you southwest or northeast? But overall, it's been wild. It's been sort of unprecedented on how short a period of time. We've had boom markets where rents have been on the rise on a steady rate, but in such a short period of time for them to spike so high so quickly. And it is all related, like you say, Troy. It has everything to do with low sale inventory, low listing inventory.
Nowhere else to go.
Driving would-be home buyers into rentals that they just needed a place to live. And then also willing and figuring out how to be able to go ahead and pay that higher rent that the landlord's demanding because the market is dictating it. They're able to raise those rents and still get them. And so it comes down to supply and demand. And yes, we have had a shortage, and we're seeing that play out in this huge rent increase that we've been able to have over the last couple of years.
And I know that you also are in the financial side of it on the mortgage side. So I would assume at 5.5, we're seeing a lot less refis out there.
We are, because a lot of people refied over the last, people have refied. So if you've owned your house over the last, say, 10, 12 years, you probably refied a few times, right?
Yeah.
Even if you weren't cash out, you weren't trying to pull money out for any purpose. You were just resetting yourself into a better interest rate 2 or 3 times over, because between, say, 2009 and 2019, for that 10-year period, there were lots of opportunities where you could have ended up with a 6% mortgage and you could have ended up with a 2.5% mortgage. And there was that opportunity to reset numerous times and improve your position. A lot of people who wanted to refinance have refinanced, right? And so now we're to the point, we're kind of at the tail end of that there is a little bit of a panic refinance crowd where they were waiting for them to go even lower. And now that they haven't, they ran out and got whatever they could. I think now refinances are driven for cash out. We aren't seeing the refinance crowd who's improving their interest rate only, doing a rate and term refinance. We're seeing refinances for some cash out purpose where they're going to go use the money. We have this great graphic that, shows the last 50, 60 years of interest rates. It shows the 1970s when they were up in the 17, 19%, and on down through the 90s and to present day. And we have a little red dot there like you see in the mall where it says you are here, and it's funny to see that in perspective because what you realize is we're still way low. Our cost of money, if cost of money on your mortgage is in the 5s at all, that's still a very low, historically low interest rate. Probably the average, over that little chart that we have is probably 7-8%.
We just have had a very low long run, so people aren't used to those numbers.
We have.
And my first home was 7.25, and I thought that was great. And I recall speaking to my boss that was in the real estate business first. And he said he was in the sales of 23%.
Yeah.
That was years and years ago. And so it's changed. But, I stop and think of all the things that are going on. We talk about wages maybe people might be bringing home a little bit more, but in reality, with inflation, I was in Los Angeles yesterday, and there's $9 a gallon diesel in Los Angeles, $8 unleaded. That's just one thing. Food, everything costs more.
Healthcare, which we're going to get into in a minute.
I mean, I can go on and on and on. I'm a pool guy, right? And so I just put in a chlorine system in my pool, and my buddies go, "Wow, that's pretty expensive." I go, "Well, that's about $1,200 to $1,800." I said, "Have you looked at chlorine?" They go, "Why?" A bucket of chlorine is $250 right now. So it'll pay for itself in a few years.
Yeah.
But I mean, everything. And of course, it was a COVID thing and a shortage. But
supply chain.
I think people have some uncertainty in, it's just volatility, just like in the stock market. People get a little scared and are afraid to pull the trigger. I know a lot of people don't want to buy, but they're going, is my job secure? Can I afford the food and utilities and all the things that come with life? And the home is the American dream, Amanda, which I wouldn't say don't, but I would think that it needs to slow down. But on the other side, don't you think a slowdown is also maybe a good thing?
Yeah, and I think that's what we're in the middle of right now, and I think that's why I say to the millennial crowd too, and everybody out there, is to be patient, because these things don't last very long. These transition periods don't last very long. We're probably entering in a recession, by definition of two negative GDP quarters in a row is a recession. We're probably going to get numbers out in the next couple of months that, in fact, we are in the midst of one. But, is that the end of the world? Well, it was kind of bound to happen at some point, right? Wasn't it? I mean, how long can we go? I mean, we've been on a pretty wild run for the last 10, 12 years. And so, a little slowdown. Well, let's face it, the Fed's stated goal right now is to raise interest rates with the stated goal of slowing the economy. So they will not
just not to recession, hopefully.
Well, I think
like
that they
balance.
understand that a recession is maybe the indicator that tells them to take their foot off that gas or brake, whichever side you're looking at it. I think there is a little bit of an underlying thing going on with the Fed, not a little bit, maybe more importantly than the interest rate rise, and that is this roll-off of their balance sheet. So, when they started in 2009 buying mortgage-backed securities and growing this balance sheet in this kind of new thing they came up with to just, how are we going to solve this? Don't worry about it. We got it solved. And so for, the last 10 years, they've been growing their balance sheet to, kind of a ridiculous number, I think of 9 trillion is what they're at now. And so not only are they raising interest rates, but they're also reversing that quantitative easing things that they've been doing over the last 12 years. That starts this month. And I think that is going to have effects that are very hard to predict. Again, I'm not necessarily saying the sky's falling. I think it's just going to be interesting to watch it play out and see what effects it will have, because we have seen the relationship between the stock market, bond market, real estate market, and Fed funds rate rise and lower over many decades now. Even really since the 1970s, we've gotten into a routine of understanding how those things interact with each other over different markets and cycles. Something that is a bit unprecedented is still this: let's grow our Federal Reserve balance sheet to $9 trillion and then figure out how to get that off of our balance sheet. And we're about to figure that out. And I think that might be something too that kind of plays out in uncertain terms, and it'll be interesting to see how that affects various aspects of the economy, real estate being a very important one.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I wonder if we've seen the anticipation of that happening priced into everything yet, or if that has not actually been priced in adequately, and then we're going to see some major corrections. Potentially. I'm not saying we are, but I would
say what the Fed has broadcast in terms of their interest rate hikes for the rest of the year, because they've been pretty specific about what they do plan to do. I can say that has probably been priced into the mortgage rates that we're seeing. And I think that's why they went up by 2 or 3% and not just the 1% that the Fed has raised their Fed funds rate. What I think is harder to price in and is on some people's radar and maybe not even on some others is the impact that this Fed balance sheet roll-off will have over time. And I think I don't know if they're I don't know that the smart people out there creating these models and trying to predict this stuff are really able to model this unknown territory. And so
they're
are they
attempting
being
to,
careful?
obviously.
They're
Right.
trying to,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
But it's going to be really, I don't think we'll be able to say until hindsight whether or not they modeled it correctly and took the right approach to it.
Yeah. Amanda, I know you got a question. I want to have one more follow-up to what Troy brought up, and then we're going to switch gears and go into Troy's role a little bit. So, Amanda, hold that thought real quick. But Troy brought up a point, and I think a lot of listeners may have this question. You brought up the uniqueness of a property now, right? Having some maybe more intrinsic value. Also talked about, Troy, refinancing rate and term, not as much anymore because of what the interest rates are. But what advice do you have for somebody who maybe needs $50,000, $60,000 remodel their house to make that a nice, unique, specific property, and to take advantage of the equity that they have in their home to do that with the intention of maybe selling it in the near future?
Well, I would still say that that's going to be your lowest cost of capital, is that you can borrow on your personal residence, owner-occupied personal residence, cheaper than probably anywhere else you can borrow. You know, what compares to it sometimes is maybe an auto loan where they're running a special rate for 1 or 2%. But across the board, when you look at the spectrum of places you can borrow from and things you can secure it with, I don't know of a better trade-off than the house you're living in, because you're enjoying the ability to live there and have a roof over your head, but simultaneously being able to draw down on the equity, that sort of equity bank account that you have in that property at a really government subsidized cost of capital interest rate. And there's really no other area that exists as good as I see it exists in real estate. And if you're going to turn around and put that money that you've borrowed right back into the property, then I think that even makes more sense. I advise people a lot, you got to be really careful about going out and using that money that you just took
To buy a boat.
to buy a boat or anything that depreciates or anything that does not have the same life and time horizon as that house. So if you're borrowing against the house, either put it back into the house or put it into something that has a similar risk profile, time profile, all the things that money would have served you in that house. Make sure it's serving you somewhere else in a similar manner. Like, for example, a rental property or something else that's very similar. I think that where people get in trouble is they take that cash out and then they put it in something that is just very different than that equity in that house. And so they remove the equity from the house and then it doesn't serve them as well in some other area. So I think that we are still at that low cost of capital. And I still think that what you can borrow and your ability to borrow against your own personal residence is still a great source of that capital, as long as you're going to go use it for a pretty smart investment, such as reinvesting it back into that property.
Yeah, good advice. Amanda, didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, no problem. So we've talked a little bit about kind of government. And so I want to pivot into talking about the state of California and the building codes. And I mean, I've heard that the state is limiting different like new builds and then changing a bunch of the new building codes. Have you seen that come up and that's going to cause a big issue with like inventory and things?
I don't necessarily see where it is going to cause a big issue. The government regulation, I think, is always, probably for every industry, on the top 2 or 3 list of risks that are very hard to predict and very hard to navigate, because the tides can change so quickly at that level. So that regulatory level can just change on a dime when you least expect it. And here you were on a 4 or 5 year plan on a development, or you had something going that really, you took the risk, you went out, you bought it, you put money into it, you borrowed to make things work, and you weren't going to see a return on investment for 4 or 5 years. And during that 4 or 5 year period, the regime changes, or, somebody writes a bill that, they feel like has to be done right away. And suddenly during your project, something changes. So I don't know if that it just is building codes or if it's just government regulation in general that does make it difficult to navigate. Now, I'm a little bit biased because I live in this state, and so I really only have this lens to look through, but I do see it being ever more difficult to seem to get anything done or be able to at least predict what tomorrow's going to bring when it comes to things like this. The state of California actually relaxed some of their building codes statewide because of housing shortage, and they encouraged the construction of ADUs, and they encouraged municipalities to take a more aggressive stance on providing more high-density housing zonings in areas, within the city. But naturally, you're going to get that not in my backyard, the NIMBYs come out, and we have them in our community, like everybody has them in every community, where they say, well, that sounds like a great idea, I'm going to vote for that, but I don't want it next to me, right? And so I think that every community and the state of California still struggles with the fact that they probably want more high density housing, they probably want fewer regulations and fewer barriers to entry to build something great and amazing and a great concept and a great idea. but for whatever reason, they want to do it, but for whatever reason, they do exactly the opposite of what it takes to get something like that done. And
Not
they create
in their
more
gated
regulation.
community.
Yes, exactly.
It's a great question. I think that segues very well over to Troy. Speaking of government regulation in California, what's going on in your world, Troy?
Well, before we get into regulations in healthcare and new requirements, I really want to talk about the shift that we've seen in the employer market. I think everybody in here knows that employers are struggling to recruit and retain. Everywhere I go, I hear recruit, retain. I do business with some very high-end industries, engineering, for example, CPA is another one. And believe it or not, they got yard sign says, we're hiring, which you've never seen that. The fast food restaurants has kind of always been a deal. The drive-through says, we're hiring. I see it everywhere now. And so employers are struggling to do that. So in working with me, for the first time in 20 years, I've really seen a shift in mentality of we need to do something better on the benefits to attract and retain employees. Not only that, but obviously we're still in a pandemic. Health is a major concern, the health of employees. If your employees aren't well, they're probably not performing. Or if they're coming to work ill, they're probably not doing you any good as well. So we've seen a lot of that. So really the typical trend and budgeting of healthcare from year to year, believe it or not, is about a 10%. Sometimes it's below, sometimes it's above. I see a lot of employers that are governed by boards doubling that number, trying to, again, retain and recoup what they have as far as employees go. Another big trend that we see is EAP, Employee Assistance Program. It's just a big word for most of us, but it's typically, a lot of employers have it and may not be aware of it. It's really an assistance program for employees and their families, more on the mental side. But you got to remember, just because you might be stressed and have anxiety and a lot of uncertainty in the air, what's going on, it could be related to maybe a relationship, maybe a loss of somebody, maybe a financial devastation. So it's a lot bigger than that. It could be personal, could be legal, could be health. But if you just turn the news on, trust me, you'll have anxiety in about 40 minutes. So
40 seconds more likely.
So people are really focusing on the mental health. I mean, I read statistics, which are boring to most people, but depression and abuse in the home is up about 600%. Suicide rates, for great example, is high. Addiction is through the roof. And there's no excuse. So people are trying to create or utilize programs to give consumers resources to cope with life. Everyone needs a little help, and again, it can go from financial to very personal.
What are some of those techniques or strategies that companies?
Well, there's counselors, Kyle. It's a great question. There's certain laws written around certain industries, like the first responders. They are required to get 10 face-to-face visits with a counselor per incident. So if you're a policeman or a fireman, and you run across something and you're having a hard time dealing with it, you get 10 face-to-face visits with a counselor, psychologist as well. So that's just one example of an industry. But most of them have at least 3 to 4. It's unlimited phone. It's 24 hours. It's also private from your employer. So if I'm talking to a counselor, my employer doesn't know that I'm struggling with somebody bullying me at work, for example, which is a reality. It could be anything. So there's a lot of privacy as well. But it gives people resources. They just don't have them. And so we're trying to give everyone tools to live a more quality life, if you will. The forecast in healthcare is a little scary. Last year, I did a lot of speaking about the forecast, and believe it or not, COVID was obviously on the headlines. Utilization was down because everything was built for the last 2 years around COVID. I mean, we've seen everything. If you don't have COVID, don't come to the doctor. COVID created a lot of negative things, but some positive things too. In the medical world, physical visits is kind of a thing of the past. About 80% of doctor visits is virtual now. You're talking to your doctor on your iPhone or through Skype or, Zoom meetings or on the phone, and so they're utilizing technology. I just read something today that the average doctor visit, they're saving $130 per visit if you use a virtual type visit rather than a traditional walk-in type scenario. So that is here to stay, and the government has endorsed that, and that will be part of it. Now, it doesn't work for everybody, and obviously they can't do procedures if they can't touch you typically. But counseling, obviously they can. I know I just listened to Kyle's podcast with a counselor the other day, and all her meetings are virtual. She's in a different state than her patient. So it's a thing. It's here to stay. And so that is obviously here. So claim utilization was down. They prolonged or postponed elective surgeries.
I was saying elective procedures.
Unfortunately, and preventative type treatments or tests, diagnostic tests, cancer screening, for example, that could create what we call maybe somewhat of a swell of a tidal wave coming at us. We don't know what that looks like.
So, for example, last 2 years, maybe you've seen I'm just throw out this number randomly, a 50% decrease in, say, colonoscopies, right?
I would say higher than that.
Okay, I'm 80%. Whatever
unless
that
it was
is.
medically necessary,
Right.
if it was preventative.
Right.
I'm a great example. 2 years ago, I turned 50. I was due for my colonoscopy, first time in my life. It took me two years to get it scheduled.
My question is, I think this is what you're referencing, the tidal wave. So how many of those 80% who didn't get that colonoscopy are now maybe having an advanced disease process who otherwise wouldn't have and are now forced onto our healthcare system?
And that's the unknown that we just don't know, because there's still a lot of people in limbo that really, haven't necessarily. Guy, I can tell you, because I have clients that I speak with quite often, there were people that were so paranoid they didn't even refill prescriptions because they're afraid to go to the drugstore. There's really no excuse for that. You can do mail order. There's a lot of things you can do. They even deliver. But people quit filling prescriptions, and that's always been a thing. And then there's the thing that Scott was just talking about. It's all relative to cost. Back in the old days, large employers that never offered insurance in like an entry-level position, let's talk ag, for example, they may not have even offered plans. All those field employees had zero coverage. They had a system, it's probably Medi-Cal, or they go to Mexico and it's their system or the clinic. So because of the requirement of the Affordable Care Act, they put in the bare minimum, which is what we call a bronze plan, and we made it affordable. Well, a bronze plan may be $500 to $5,000 deductible. Well, these people are making $30,000 a year. They just don't have the means to do it, or to fill a prescription, or even a doctor visit. I mean, we're seeing doctor visits right now. Plans, the copay is $125 for a copay.
Just for PCP, primary
copay.
Care? Wow.
I mean, I'm not that old, but how many times have you heard people talk about $5, $10, $20, $20? So deductibles are now hitting $8,000. Out-of-pocket maxes are in the 9s, and so $18,000 for a family. And I just talked about a gentleman that's making $24,000, $25,000 a year. If him and his family are insured, which chances are they won't be, there's no way they can afford it. If they have a serious situation, they could have an $18,000 out-of-pocket loss.
Or bankruptcy.
Right. So it's out of control. The providers have taken on some additional costs, mostly with PPE, and some of that stuff hasn't been reimbursed. I mean, I know providers that are actually trying to charge surcharges, which is somewhat against their contracts, just for PPE equipment. They're all trying to figure out a way to make up some of these losses. And so that's going to continue. My forecast this year, unfortunately, we're already seeing third quarter rates. They're pretty stable, within trend below 10%. But in the large group arena, that's above 100 employees. We're going to see double digits. And is that 12% or is that 29%? I really don't know. But I've been looking at some data, and it's not spike claims, which is my concern. It's a lot of utilization across the board, which is good. There's people going, but again, they haven't went in the last 2 years. So now we're seeing it. And so we're going to see that for sure. A little bit on the legislation side, the Consolidated Appropriations Act in December was finalized. What does that mean? That is the No Surprise Act. It's the transparency rule, if you've heard about that, where hospitals have to publish their rates. They got a pass on their deadline. They couldn't make it, so that's going to be postponed. But the reason why I bring it up, insurance agents, that's me, or brokerage firms, we have to disclose our commissions, which I actually kind of like the law. It's not that you can save money by shopping around, because it's all regulated from the Department of Insurance, and the commission, if you will, is embedded in the premium. There is some differentials in the large group arena. It is negotiable where people can do it, but it's all about transparency so people know exactly. And I think that's always been a standard protocol in a real estate market to disclose your commissions.
It has been for quite a while.
Right.
Yeah. Definitely on the realtor side of things, it got very transparent in the lending side after the boom and bust in 08, 09. And yeah, I think I don't think that necessarily changes the pay structure as people might think it would. I think the transparency is good, and I think at the end of the day, people just feel a little better about the entire transactions because they understand who's getting paid what, where, and I think they get their heads wrapped around, how are people earning their piece of this transaction that I'm getting involved in. So I think it's a healthy thing.
God, if you had a procedure done in the hospital, wouldn't you like to know that that's going to cost you $1,150 instead of the unknown?
Yeah, 100%.
So what happens when it's unknown? People don't do it, which is not good for the healthcare system or the consumer. So it's a big deal. Pharmacy is supposed to, Big Pharma is supposed to publish their rates too. So there's a lot of pushback. Those are big lobby groups talking about lobby groups. And so
that probably won't go through.
And that's been it's already there, but it's been postponed, and we'll just see that. And then the last thing is Cal Savers. That's the California required retirement plan for all employers 5 or more.
That's a deadline coming up, right?
The deadline is June 30th. So we've worked with a lot of our groups getting them qualified retirement plans in there, but Cal Savers is a program. It's quite a cumbersome process, if you will. It's basically a simple IRA, and everyone's opted in unless you opt out. And if you have, just think about it, maybe, again, a farm worker has a lot of seasonal people. I have a farmer in Arvin that has about 1,000 people through a 12-month period. They're all in, and they're all going to show up day one of payroll and say, I want out. Because, again, they're making $25,000, $30,000 a year. They can't afford a retirement plan. So it's a nightmare for bookkeeping. But it still makes sense for some of them. And don't get me wrong, because although I'm not against a requirement, America is not ready for retirement. We're not planning. We're not teaching our kids at a younger age. So to do something is the right step. But I think most people, again, back to retention and recruitment, would probably look elsewhere and maybe put in a 401k themselves to be able to have more flexibility and customize it based upon their needs instead of the state program. It's pretty rigid. But yes, that deadline's coming June 30th. And
if you got any business owners out there who haven't made steps to plan for that yet, is it too late, or are you still?
In most cases, yeah, it's probably a little late. They can still do it. There's probably some penalties. But you can get into Cal Savers probably within a day. You just go on the computer and on their web page and you register. So it is an option for sure.
Great. So just to ask some clarifying questions just for small business owners out there who are listening. Essentially what this is you have to offer a retirement plan to your employees if you have 5 or more. And if you don't, you have to enroll them into Cal Savers, which is a state program that they put the money into and the state manages if they manage it.
Yes.
And so from there, what happens if you have a retirement plan and your employees opt out? Do they still have to go into Cal Savers?
They do not. It's a great question. So you just have to offer it. And just let me talk about a little flexibility. So back to the ag thing. Ag is wonderful to talk about because it's such a big part of our industry in Kern County. Unfortunately, most field workers or ag-related employees, not all, will not participate in a retirement plan and don't want to because of the cost. So an employer can customize it and say, we can put a 1-year wait, which eliminates all those seasonal people right away. So you don't have to worry about all those people signing up through that. And then maybe 2 entry levels every 6 months. And you're kind of disqualifying those, but you're not doing it because they're not, that you don't want to offer it. You're doing it because it's just another burden, if you will, for the, administration wise for the employer to have to maintain and manage this. So if you opt out, Amanda, you do not have to go into Cal Savers. Long as the employer, it's an employer mandate basically. If the employers have to offer something, if you have 5 or more, it's either you put in a plan or go to Cal Savers.
So my other one for the listeners out there, because I've been getting a lot of these questions because we do bookkeeping, even if you're paying into Cal Savers, depending on what payroll program, whether you have a privately funded IRA or 401k plan or Cal Savers, you internally still have to be tracking those for your employees and sending in those reports. So anybody listening, it's going to be really, really crucial, whether you have a plan that you go through for an insurance agency or if you're going through Cal Savers, that you're tracking what your employees are putting into those accounts.
That is correct. Yep.
One more follow-up before we switch gears here. You mentioned ag a lot, which is obviously huge in the Central Valley, but so is oil. And those, the employees in the oil industry are a little different than the seasonal ag workers. What are they doing and what are they having to deal with maybe a lot of people who are choosing to opt into that? Is that where you come in?
My personal view of the oil industry, and I'm talking more of the service side, not the major oil companies or oil companies. They're pretty cut in their ways, if you will, as far as growth and, personnel wise. They may have some struggles for key positions, engineering and so on, but in the service side, they're really having a hard time getting employees. I really think, unfortunately, and I come from the oil industry, I'm a Taft boy, so I'll go ahead and say that. I think people that's been in the trend of the oil industry up and down have gotten to a point where they've moved on and tried to find another occupation that's not so volatile.
Right.
And they probably don't want to go, they're trying not to go back. So it's hard to get people to come back. And you know, I'm a great example. I love the oil industry. I believe in it, but you know, it's volatile and it's very difficult. So it's great when it's great, but boy, it's not good when it's bad. And it happens so fast. And you know, even though oil is over $100 a barrel, they're not spending the money here in Kern County because there's no permitting. And everyone forecasted at the beginning of the year basically a zero increase. So they're maintaining. You know, you go out there, you look at the rig count. They're not drilling in. It might be a thing to the past in California from what we know, which is pretty sad. So personnel-wise, the service companies are really, really struggling to get people. So what do they have to do? Having to pay more, which it's all relative, you know. Minimum wage in January, $15.50, doesn't matter the size of your group. You know, it used to be 25 and above. We have a different number.
Scale it. Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, it's crazy. And, you know, it's just an education piece. So what's it cost for a minimum wage employee to flip burgers, if you will, you know, call it entry level? What's a burger going to cost us in a year from now? You know, it's got to be relative to the wage and output. Kind of what
I see it in home prices. Right?
You see it everywhere.
We all see it in home prices, right? And rents. We talked about rents.
You know, Scott, I remember talking to you a year ago about construction and the lumber prices.
Yeah.
You know, and we all have 100 things. We're going to go, well, what about cars? There's no, you know.
You can't find chips to,
you can't, everything is just, it's an industry that's, I don't know. It's quite interesting. But anyway, the healthcare industry will continue to do its thing. I think, I'm hoping that we see some plateau, but again, there's some unforeseen things that will probably get a good idea of that iceberg late this year and then next year. And it's not good news for employers, but and then you turn around and try to enhance your benefits. It's bottom line profit.
Right.
You know, wages are going up, so is insurance, and now you want to enhance it, and you can't even get employees. It's really a pretty dark situation.
Kyle, Troy's telling us that 80% of people are seeing their doctors via Zoom calls during COVID. Can a patient have a med mal?
I was just gonna. I don't want to go there, but I was gonna say I think I'm gonna be getting a lot more calls here in the next couple of years. You know,
does that qualify? Or?
Well, no. I mean, I just how can you treat someone without really taking a physical history?
Have you ever done one, Kyle?
Not by choice.
Has Scott? No. Has anybody in here ever done a virtual meeting with your doctor?
Absolutely, and had something misdiagnosed.
Yeah,
really.
There you go.
Because what I do know from my experience is it's not everything. It's like 7 out of 10 things that they will treat you virtually. Now, don't get me wrong. Every doctor is going to be different, but the major firms have the protocol. It's like, then you need to come see us. So
I'm not going to mention names, but I have a friend colleague who, through a local facility, I actually don't want to mention their name either, but it rhymes. No, I'm just kidding. They kept having these Zoom calls. The doctor's woman complaining of the problem with her ear, and they kept prescribing different antibiotics. She went through like 6 round antibiotics. Her skin was getting all tore up. Her stomach was messed up. So she finally went in and saw somebody else outside of her network because she was just not getting better. And they're like, you don't have an ear infection. This is not what we're treating here. Well, you don't have an ear infection. And she got cleared up off the antibiotics and is fine now. But well, I tell you, I don't like the idea of telemed.
The hard thing that I see is my mom and dad are in their 70s. Yep. Mom has, computer obviously, but dad, no. They're just not real good at it.
Yeah.
And they're not real comfortable with it. And so, some things work, some things don't. You don't have to go that route.
I don't know about you guys, but I actually, my wife is a self-proclaimed doctor because she
WebMD.
She has
Google MD.
You guys probably have mom, wife, significant other, something, right? Where you don't even need. I just go to the doctor and tell him
what my wife says.
My wife said I have this.
So I actually just need the Zoom call. I don't need anything more than the Zoom call. I'm good because we've already got it figured out over here, Doc. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you're,
ask her.
If you're on like thyroid medication, right, and then you go get blood work, and then you just need to tell a med appointment for them to review your blood work, and then either change up or down or decrease your dosage. That's fine. Efficient use of time makes sense. I mean, we do some things. Zoom depositions, Zoom court appearance for routine appearances, routine witnesses. I love being able to hop on Zoom. stay in my office, get it done in an hour instead of driving across town and driving back and wasting an hour. That's great. But, do I want to do a trial on Zoom?
No.
Not being able to engage with the jury? Do I want to argue a motion in front of a judge that, like a summary judgment motion that would, potentially dismiss your case? No. So I think with medicine and with all of our professions, I think, these telephonic or Zoom meetings or consultations are they have a spot,
things can be missed
for sure, but you're going to miss a lot of things if you rely on that for your entire practice. So moving on to the CPA world with John Duffield sitting here, employee retention credits.
Can I change the topic?
Well, shit, you should have told the moderator, but yeah, I guess. Go ahead.
I'm trying to be nice, but I have to tell you my teledoc story. So,
oh yes,
in April of 2020, right, and so business kind of shuts down around that March 15th period.
Right.
So, I'm working from the office. I'm not working from home, and everybody else is shut down around me. But anyway, so I'm going through this, and I develop, is something that's on my lip that I think is a cold sore, basically. And so I get on the Zoom call with my doctor, and he's looking at me. And at the time, I had a goatee, mustache, the works, and so that's a cold sore, right? And so he called in a antibiotic for that, and so started taking the antibiotic. It seemed to work, right? Everything is getting better. The prescription runs out, and so I'm, trying to reschedule again to get a refill, and there's this lag in time, probably about a month, between this happens. And so then he refills it again, probably June-ish, July, something to this effect, kind of go through the same thing. Everything gets better and prescription runs out, and then it starts getting worse again. And so I end up going, trying to get an in-person appointment with my family practitioner. My family practitioner, and absolutely love the guy, and can't see him in person. And so he happens to be with Dignity. Dignity handed me to another physician, what was a physician's assistant. And so
PA.
I had a PA. And so I had an in-person, and she looked at me and she said, that's not a cold sore. And so it's skin cancer is what it was, right? And so then that was diagnosed by her in effectively like in December of 2020. And then I was then sent to CBCC and going through that routine and fighting insurance and the whole routine that we go through to ultimately not start treatment until September of 2021. And so it was interesting.
So 16-month delay in diagnosis and treatment.
That's correct. Yeah.
Well, call 661.
Right. Yeah.
Just a little.
Right.
Okay.
So then, so still kind of going through that process with follow-ups and everything else that it is. So, I think the virtual has its place. I really honestly do. The interesting part about it is I think as consumers, to some degree, I think we need to push back at some point and go, yeah, I understand this is a time that teledoc is perfect. And then there's a time that teledoc's not appropriate for that. Right. And
100%.
so the natural tendency, I think, is for us to all just to say, yeah, whatever you tell me to do is what I'm going to go do. But I think we have to be our best advocate and be pushy when we're taking care of ourselves and going at that, right? Same thing in the tax world, by the way. And so we're going to talk about that today. Yeah, nice segue. So first of all, friendly reminder, June 15th is coming up. So for those listeners that pay estimated quarterly tax payments to our lovely federal or state government, don't forget that. So that's coming up pretty quick. That's that second estimate that you might be paying during the year. So remember that you have that. I was glad to hear Troy talking about Cal Savers. That's a big deadline that's coming up June 30. And then I want to talk about another deadline. And I originally did have employee retention credits on my kind of on my agenda for today. But then Scott sent an email out and said somebody talk about AB 150, which is what I'm going to talk about today. Because
this seems really relevant. Also timing wise, right, John? And I think it's one of those things that if people don't know about it, they're going to miss a potential opportunity.
Yeah, it's a big thing, Scott. And the key date right now is June 15th, for the record. So let me take you back a little way. So back in 2017, we had a tax law change, Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and the Fed came out with, tax limitation that us in the industry, we call it a SALT limitation at state and local taxes. And what the Fed said is that the grand total of those state and local taxes that could be taken as an itemized deduction on somebody's individual income tax return was capped at $10,000. And so what happened when that happened is that you had a lot of high income earners or high state of California taxpayers, maybe people that paid a lot of property taxes. All of a sudden they saw the amount of that deduction be limited on their tax return. What started happening is there was a little bit of an exodus from some of those high tax states, places like New York or places like California, where people said, hey, we're going to start moving out of those states because the state level income taxes are high there, the property taxes are high there, and then on the top of it, we're not getting a federal income tax deduction, so we'll go to a place that maybe has a lower state level income tax rate or lower property tax rate, so that maybe soften the blow a little bit. So a lot of states started working on what is called the workaround, and California added their name to this list this last year in 2021. And so California has a new pass-through entity tax election that if you happen to be the owner of the right pass-through entity, that you can take advantage of that. So for those listeners that have S corporations, the right partnership, the right LLC, you really want to pay attention and utilize this technique. If you're not doing it, 2021 was the first year that it was allowed to be used. It's candidly, it's not for everybody, but if you're a listener and you have this pass-through entity as your business entity today and you're not utilizing this technique, then I would make it a point to contact your tax preparer, CPA, whatever it is, by June 15th or before June 15th so that you can do this. So now let me tell you how it works. The way that the PTET election works is that whatever income shows up on that tax return for that pass-through entity, you calculate a 9.3% tax based on the net income of that organization. That tax is then paid by that business entity. What happens then is the state of California, first of all, gives you a credit that flows through to your personal income tax return. So for whatever tax that you actually do pay to the state of California through that business entity, you get an individual income tax credit on it, number one. Number two, you then get to take the federal tax deduction for the amount of taxes that are paid to the state of California. And so effectively what you're doing is you're shifting the tax on that net income from that business entity. You're shifting it from you, the individual, through to the business. And then by doing that, you're, number one, making that tax deductible. Number two, you're getting a credit on your personal income tax return. Couple of nuances.
Sorry, John,
on it.
you're speaking like, I'm not a CPA, right? So I'm just
Absolutely.
I'm a dumb attorney. What does that look like numbers wise? So what does it look like?
So let me give you an example. I was thinking about this, and Kyle, I was actually thinking of an example of somebody that maybe was a high income earner, sole proprietor, and why maybe it might make sense for somebody to give some consideration to forming that S corporation to all of a sudden be able to take advantage of that. So let's pretend that you have a sole proprietor out there, that has net income on that sole proprietorship of $150,000. If that same sole proprietorship were utilizing an S corporation instead of that sole proprietorship model, they would then take that $150,000. You would calculate 9.3% of that, so that's roughly $14,500. Right, that $14,500 would be paid through that S corporation business. The individual would then get a credit on their personal tax return of that $14,500, and then they would also get a federal tax deduction for the $14,500 that is paid to the state of California and then deducted on their federal tax return. For somebody that might be in a 24% marginal tax bracket, you're going to take that $14,500 times that 24%. So that's going to be about a $4,000, $3,000 to $4,000 tax benefit. I had a client say to me, I walked through this trying to explain this to somebody, and the client put it just in the best way possible. And the client said, well, that seems to me like that's a 24% annual rate of return on my money. Why wouldn't I do that? And that's exactly the answer. It's what federal marginal tax bracket are you in? 24%, in my example. And then that's the savings that you're going to have on the federal side by utilizing that technique. Right. And so there are taxpayers where it doesn't make sense. There are taxpayers. I have a taxpayer who had a lot of business income, but had a lot of losses on their personal tax return, so that ultimately the tax wasn't there. So they didn't need to make the credit through the business to be able to take advantage of this technique. But for the most part, individuals that have successful businesses that have profit in it, would want to look and give some consideration to it.
John, is this significant enough that a business operating as a sole proprietor now would consider incorporating and forming an LLC or S Corp to take advantage of this?
Well, Scott, in the example I just gave you, we're talking about saving $3,000 to $4,000 in just in federal income taxes, right? That's the difference between being that sole proprietor, being that S corporation, and being able to utilize that technique. It didn't have to be an S corporation. It could be even a single member LLC, by the way, can use that technique.
But they do, to be clear, they have to be incorporated in some kind of entity. They can't just be a sole proprietor.
Right, that's correct. They have to be an entity that California considers a pass-through entity.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, sole proprietorships are considered disregarded entities for the purpose of this tax, so they don't qualify.
Well, with respect to that, aren't LLCs a disregarded entity to the IRS?
They are, but strangely enough, though, California added some legislative component to allow single-member LLCs, and so they're not considered disregarded for this particular pass-through tax.
And do you have to elect to be taxed as an S corp as an LLC to qualify, or can you just do an LLC?
You could be a single-member LLC
okay.
and still utilize that technique. So
that's a good distinction.
Yeah. So, I've had clients that have had multiple entities, Scott, and so that maybe they're owners of more than one S corporation. And so we're seeing multiple elections that are kind of coming through. So it just really depends on the circumstance. Now, what are the key dates? So I said June 15th. If you utilize this technique for the 2021 tax year, first of all, you had to pay some money with your income tax return for the 2021 year. The state of California required that there was a second component of that, and that was that there's a deposit that then got made on June 15th of 2022 if, in fact, you were going to utilize that for the 2022 year. So now I've used it for 2021, and I'm going to use it for 2022. I have to make that deposit. If somebody then comes in and says, hey, I want to use it in 2022 for the first time, they have to make a $1,000 deposit by June 15th of this year to be able to utilize it for 2022, even though they hadn't utilized this technique for the 2021 tax year. So June 15th is a key date for somebody that's that business owner that's out there that wants to use it and has to put that in place for the 2022 year.
So is it just the deposit, or do they actually have to file their articles by the 15th as well?
So the deposit, Kyle, so that's, I know where your mind is going, and so you would have to have a state ID number effectively to be able to, create that voucher to send that money to the state of California.
So you'd have to file the articles, get your EIN.
You'd have to have that before June 15th. So,
meaning they better call you right away, Kyle.
Yeah, that's a lot of planning to do. Yeah. I got to call myself, I think.
Real quick, let me ask you, John, on the payment of that state tax, can it be the individual, the pass-through individual, or must the entity pay that state tax in order for it to be?
Yeah, so the tax actually goes in with that business tax return, Scott, and so it goes in under that business tax return tax ID number. The interesting part about it is that even though it's being paid by the business, it's basically the credit on a per individual basis. And so what California is allowing is saying that let's pretend that we have a multi-owner S corporation. There's 5 of us, and it works for me, but it doesn't work for the other 4 individuals. Well, I can elect to make this election and have that tax paid in for my benefit, but the other 4 of you don't have to make that choice and make that election. So
that is an interesting aspect, because it doesn't require unanimous consent necessarily from the entire ownership. It is a very individual. Now, is it done it's done at the company level, though, so it doesn't need to be done by the company.
Yeah, it's done at the company level, and it really requires kind of unanimous consent that entity is going to utilize the technique, but it doesn't require mandatory participation in the credit by everybody.
Is there any limit? I know a lot of times these things get rolled out with some kind of a limit that up to a certain amount, but it's whatever that entity's state tax burden is the deduction.
Think about this. So I have a high income earner that utilizes an S corporation. Last year, their net income was $1.5 million, and so they paid about $200,000 to the state of California in state income taxes. They got a $10,000 deduction on their federal tax return, right? Mm-hmm. And so now all of a sudden we're going in, and that $1.5 million, 9.3%, that's at $145,000 roughly, and so we're making that election, and so that's going to save them about $35,000 to $40,000 in taxes on the federal side for that. So yeah, there's no limit.
Is this a use or lose it, or could someone plan and maybe, okay, I missed the boat, but 2023, I'm going to take advantage of that.
Yeah, so you can go in and make that election. As the laws, as AB 150 is on the books right now, this is expected to sunset in 2025.
Okay.
And interestingly enough, the way that they drafted it is that's the same rules that SALT limitation applies to. That SALT deduction limitation went into effect January 1st of 18 and goes through 2025 as well. So
okay.
So interesting that the Biden administration had talked about raising that SALT deduction limitation from $10,000 up to $80,000, but that never passed. And so, I think it would make a lot of sense to see them make that adjustment. When you start talking about $80,000, that's going to take the majority. That would satisfy the need for the majority of the taxpayers, I think in the state of California. And then it would just start to be really, really high income earners that would benefit in some other manner. But
because that was typically New York, New Jersey, California, Illinois, Florida. Those are the states that typically were not too happy about the SALT limitations that went into effect.
Well, Florida's state tax free. They don't care. That's
example.
why that's why everybody's moving to Tennessee and to Florida and to Texas.
Is that why it's booming over there right now?
That's
John?
exactly why. Scott, it's interesting, listening you talk about real estate and then thinking about COVID, and you had a whole bunch of high income earners in New York, right, that were told all of a sudden they don't have to work in office anymore. They can go work from home. And it was easy for people to kind of jump from New York down to Florida to go do that. I was fishing in Mammoth recently, and I was talking to a guy that was our guide. We paid for a guide service. And he said that he had provided guide services for some people out of Los Angeles every year for like 10 years. And then the guy showed up again and said, "Hey, I'm your next door neighbor. I've now bought property in Mammoth because I get to work from home." And so everybody's kind of relocating because of, what they can do. But Florida, a lot of people moved from New York down to Florida because of that. And they're moving from California to Texas or Tennessee.
To Texas, Tennessee, Florida too. Yeah.
Because of those reasons. So.
All right, for the listeners out there, so that your office doesn't get bombarded in the next 14 days or other CPAs' offices don't get bombarded in the next 14 days, can you explain a little bit how they can make that $1,000, payment so that they can at least get that done so that when they do come to you next quarter or at the end of the year for tax preparation, that's already been taken care of and they can take advantage of this?
Yeah, Amanda, I would say call the CPA office. I really would. And whether they're going to be bombarded with it, but and that's just life, right? It's our obligation to help. That form number, I believe, is form 3893. If you were to go out there and go do a Google search, it's California Pass-Through Entity Tax Election Form. I would go search that, and then you'd want to find the 22 tax form. It's going to be Franchise Tax Board Form California only. And it's going to be in the name of the business. So if you're an S corporation, you happen to be that multi-owner partnership, you would want to have that be in the name of that. I would actually say, call that tax office and do it. It's really easy to do. I would say if somebody's kind of thinking about that, why not go make that election and so that you have that available to you at the very least for the 22 tax year and at least have that conversation about it. So,
but that's not the only thing you have to consider, right? Forming a corporation, there's other things that go into that thought process other than this potential tax saving. Right?
Absolutely.
You kind of go through, I know we're saying like, hey, you got to do this for a potential tax savings, but there's retirement issues come in place.
I'm not saying that at all. And I'm saying that, I've had clients that I've given a lot of reasons to as to why I think they should have, changed from a sole proprietorship to maybe an S corporation type, entity, and they've hesitated for whatever reason. I think this is yet one other reason why they might give it into consideration. I would never do it based on this one reason alone. I would never do that. And so, forming that LLC or forming that S corporation, whatever that legal liability entity happens to be, there's a lot of things that should be taken into consideration before you would go do that. You and I have tag team events before where we've talked about it, and I think we do a great job of, doing that presentation. But when I ask that question, I start with a question of liability, which is in your field, is do you have legal liability? Right. And I think that's the number one consideration, is whether or not somebody might have legal liability issues before they would start to give that consideration. situation. But it's yet another reason why somebody might is that workaround.
Because like my industry and a lot of professional industries, you can't separate that liability from your practice, right? We have to have malpractice insurance. We have to have errors and omissions. We have to have, speaking of medical malpractice, you have to have, medical malpractice insurance. So a lot of professionals can't or don't inoculate themselves from liability just by forming a legal entity.
Correct.
And some professions can't even form an LLC. So there's a lot of things I think you have to kind of go over before you make that leap, I guess.
Absolutely. I will tell you that I think, utilized appropriately, I think now that you've got this new tax law, this election available to you, as long as it's going to be in effect, it does tend to make more sense from that perspective. So thank you.
John, great topic. Thanks for bringing that to us. So we were talking about regulation. We were talking about changes. And I think that, Amanda, your topic is right up there with them, because what's kind of interesting about what you're going to talk about, if I think I know what you're going to talk about, the ripple effects of some change like this that you're going to go into are not always at face value. A lot of times people don't completely understand all the aspects that this will change for them. I'll let you take it away because I know you're eager to get after it, but I think this is a really good topic too.
Yeah. Okay. So today I'm going to be talking about the changes to the 1099-K form. So they passed the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, which made changes to the 1099-K form. 1099-K form is for anybody who's doing third-party network payments, or if you're like Venmo, PayPal, Stripe, Square, Cash App, any of those, and you're receiving payments for services, you're going to be receiving a 1099-K. The old regulations were if you would only receive a 1099-K if you had over 20,000 in sales or if you had over 200 transactions in the year. The American Rescue Plan Act changed it to now it's $600 or more in the year and any number of transactions. So this is pretty much now everybody who's receiving electronic payments for services or for products, you will be receiving a 1099-K, and from multiple different merchant services. So this is going to be really crucial to get the information out how you properly handle this, because it's going to impact everyone across the border. Even in, let's say, your industry where you use Buildertrend, you can be paid, your customers can pay you through Buildertrend, and that would be a third-party service where you would receive a 1099-K. Yeah. So it's really impacting everyone across the border. So a couple rules on record keeping that I'd like to point out kind of in the beginning here. Making sure, first and foremost, you shouldn't be commingling. I say this all the time on my Instagram page or other podcasts. Stop commingling. If you are a business owner, you need to have a separate business account. You need to be doing everything in the business for that business account. With that, it's going to be crucial that you're doing that with your Venmo and your PayPal and all these other entities that you're receiving money from. And this is going to be important because, like I said, you're going to be receiving a 1099-K. And if you have a Venmo account and it's not set up as a business and you're getting funds from your friend for that trip to Cancun or for meals or for anything that they might send you money, rent, everything's going to be reported onto that 1099-K line. Now, obviously, this is going to be going out to businesses, and not everybody who has a Venmo is set up as a business. It might be set up as a personal account. Venmo has gone out and said that if you are set up as a personal account and they can see you're doing business, they're going to send you kind of a notification, like make sure you're signing up as a business account. And if you're not listening to them and transferred to a business account, they can actually freeze your account and not allow you to use Venmo. So that's going to be really, really important, again, that you're not taking business income and personal income on the same line, because that form is going to have everything that you've been paid through for that merchant onto one line. And you're going to either have to contact that merchant to be like, hey, some of this was personal, or you're going to have to work with your tax professional to make sure like, hey, it's none of this is taxable income. I need to like redo my 1099-K form. So that's really important. Proper bookkeeping is going to be really important, because if you look at it on your bank statements, it's the net portion, not the gross portion of your sales. So what happens is if somebody pays me PayPal and they pay me $500, PayPal's taking out their fees before they enter it into my bank account. So in my bank account, I might only see like $450 instead of the full $500. And if you're not having proper bookkeeping, like invoicing and whatever accounting software you have, or you're just going through your bank statements at the end of the year and tallying it up for your tax professional, you're going to have a different gross amount than what the 1099-K is going to have. And so making sure that you're tracking your actual gross sales on these merchant sites are going to be really, really crucial. One, so that you're not paying over in tax for more money that you might not have received. And two, that your books are matching what that 1099-K is actually saying.
Yeah, or Amanda, one step further, what if you had a small business where it may not even really be a business, it's just kind of something you do on the side or something, and occasionally get handed a few $100 here and there for something that you can provide. So you don't even go to the trouble to account for expenses and things like that, because you go, well, I'm not really even running a business. Now, all of a sudden you get a 1099K for, I don't know, $4,000 or $5,000, right? And truth be told, you probably didn't make any money, right? Because you probably had expenses associated with that $4,000 or $5,000, but you hadn't been accounting for the expense side because something that you just never really thought much of. And now you get this 1099 that goes on your income tax return. That could be a problem for that person.
How do they really know it's business related, though?
I think there's going to be a whole new language, a Venmo language, encoded.
Well, you have to make a business account or a personal account.
So I didn't realize there was a business account. So I rent a room to Dave, for example. He pays me $800 a month, and he does it for 6 months, and I'm going to get a 1099. So am I subject to tax on that?
You're paying through Venmo?
Yeah. Just hypothetical.
Well, hypothetically, you should be on a Schedule E for rent, yes. But yes, on Venmo, if you set up as a business
Bad
account,
example, Dave.
Bad example.
yes,
Dave will pay way more than $800 in rent.
But
I would raise your rents.
essentially, what's happening is they just rolled out the new business accounts on Venmo, for example. Venmo's a really popular one, but PayPal and all the other ones already had business accounts, but people were still doing a personal PayPal. So what they're happening now is they're going to ask you, is this transaction services or products, or is it personal? And if enough people say this is service and products, Venmo is going to reach out to you and say, hey, you're signed up as a personal account. People are saying they're paying you for services and products. You need to switch to a business account. And if you don't switch, there's going to be, they'll freeze your account, or they'll do something that you can't use Venmo as a source of payment. So I think obviously this is the first year it's going into impact. So I think there's going to be a transition period where Venmo's not going to be able to get to everybody. So, there are people who are going to get away with it, but I feel like they're going to be tracking it, and they're going to be like finding out ways, in 2023 and 2024 to better, okay, no, you're using this as a business. We need to give you a 1099K, and you're going to get that 1099K. And that's why you need to be doing proper bookkeeping. If you can't afford to hire somebody for proper bookkeeping, you can use Google Sheets, and you can just go month by month. This was my sales. These are my expenses in the different categories, and at least do it that way, because you're going to receive that 1099K. And if you don't have those expenses reported, you're going to have to pay taxes on that.
That's why I say I think there's going to be a whole new Venmo encoded, a secret language between people trying to tell you what I paid for. Right? I paid you for rent, but it's going to be like a happy face emoji and an exclamation point is rent, right? And then
pizza.
And then they've got to decode on Venmo who's trying to run a business and who's not. I don't know. It's kind of crazy.
It's going to
push
people back to cash. So those third party they're probably going to see a pretty good hit.
Eventually, I think, because people already started doing that, where they're just putting emojis onto Venmo instead of saying what the service is. And so obviously the higher ups, IRS and Venmo, they're aware people are doing that already, because it's clear as day. Like, I have small business accounts that I follow on Instagram, and literally in their stories, they're like, oh, because of the new Venmo change, put an emoji for this for your haircut. You're literally posting it on social media, first and foremost, that's there forever. Secondly, like, they're already aware that people are going to do that, so they're going to have to make something to catch all those people. Might not be right now this year, but they're going to get caught.
Emoji algorithm, that's what it'll be.
Right. Amanda, what do you think the chances are that Venmo just sends 1099s to everybody and then lets you and I figure it out?
Good luck, right?
Right. Yeah, so I took a course on this, some continued education, and there has been no oversight from the IRS or Venmo yet on what they're going to do. So I think this tax year is going to be really interesting for us, because I think they're going to just, in the moment, make that decision, because they're going to be, oh, what about this? What about this? What about this? And I do think it's going to have to be where we're going to have to upload an attachment onto the tax form and say, like, hey, this wasn't business, exclude it, and then show proof, which is proper bookkeeping. So even if you are a personal person and you got the 1099K, they're going to ask for the download of your transcript of your Venmo activity, and you're going to have to upload that as an attachment to the tax return, is what I think is going to potentially be what they're going to do. And then if you have that attachment, they have to take time to review that. So instead of the 21-day where you're going to get your refund, it's going to potentially take longer, because now they're going to have to look over your attachments and things like that. So I think this is going to change a lot of things, and change a lot of things for on the tax side professionals as well. Because before, I don't want to say it out loud, but a lot of people weren't like, oh, were you using Venmo? Can you give me those statements? There was like, hey, give me your bank statements. A lot of the Venmo cash outs were on those bank statements. We were just tallying that up and just going from there. And now there's going to be like, no, I need that 1099K from Venmo. I need that 1099K from PayPal. I need it from this. I need it from that, because I know that you're using all those services. So I did get a couple questions when I was doing this with other business owners. One of them is if you change your entity in the middle of the year, make sure you're updating your merchant accounts. Make sure you're updating the EIN number on that merchant account so that the 1099K can go to that new entity that you formed. This is going to be really important because if you don't and it just goes to your social security number and you say you formed an S Corp, that's a whole different EIN, whole different entity, and that's not going to suffice. You're going to have to now contact the merchant and be like, oh, I changed halfway in the middle of the year and I need you to redo the 1099K. So if you're changing your entity, first thing is make sure you're contacting that merchant account and telling them that you need to update the information so that they can send, the first 6 months and whatever if you decided to do the first 6 months as the sole proprietor and then the next 6 months as the S Corp. Another thing is I've had people ask, well, what's if we're sharing credit card terminals at a business? So one example would be hair salons. A lot of them sell products at the top, and the sales tax is a nightmare on that anyways. We won't get into that today. But on this 1099K, the one person who's registered on that terminal is going to be receiving all of those gross sales. And so now you're going to have to work with the merchant and issuing them to be like, hey, this is actually for my portion and this is for this person and this person. It was also suggested by the IRS that if you receive the 1099K and all the sales are in on your tax return, that then you can then issue 1099 NECs to the other candidates who are sharing the terminal with you. So then you can obviously write that off because that's paying out contractor as a write-off, which will reduce your tax liability, and then they can report that income. So I did get a couple of those questions. What else? Oh, cashback was a big one. So in some credit card places or where you pay, you can offer to get cash back. Well, before it was never really reported on your gross sales for the 1099K, and now it will be. So making sure that you're keeping track of what your cash back is going to be really, really important because obviously you're not going to want to have that as part of your gross sales because you have to pay taxes on that. So making sure, again, bookkeeping is pretty much the big one here. This is going to change for everybody.
Lots of bookkeeping, all to account to our illustrious government about everything that we're doing on a regular basis. I think we all talked about government regulation and accounting in some form or fashion, didn't we?
Scott, you remember the administration had talked about making banks report everybody that had more than $600 worth of transactions in bank accounts, right? And that didn't pass. But this is the closest thing to that, and that is just anybody that has those, Cash App or Venmo, those types of accounts, anybody that has more than $600 worth of transactions is now being reported. So it's interesting.
And like you say, we're talking about Venmo, there's more than one, right? So this is becoming more and more the way people are transacting business. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of this.
Yeah, to clarify, because I've had some questions about Zelle. So Zelle won't actually give you the 1099K. It's going to be the bank. So just to clarify that. So PayPal
Zelle works a little different, doesn't it? It actually does like a
So it is
bank
technically kind of a third party, but it's really not. It's like a third letter, lack of word, a third party that's actually acting as the bank. So PayPal, you'll get a direct one. Venmo, you'll get a direct one. Cash App, you'll get a direct one. Stripe, you'll get a direct one. Square, you'll get a direct one. I'm sure there's a way longer list. But Zelle, you won't actually. So if you're like, oh, I use Zelle won't actually. So if you're, because a lot of these companies, they do away with mail, and you have to log into your merchant services to go download this 1099K for your taxes. So you're not going to log into Zelle and be like, I need my 1099K. You're going to log into your bank and get the 1099K from there.
The net result will be the same. You're still going to get a 1099K. It's just going to go to your bank to get it rather than Zelle. Very good, Amanda. Thank you very much. Dave Plivelich.
Yeah.
Quiet over there.
Very quiet.
I told you. I
think he's freezing.
Making me nervous quiet.
Are you freezing?
It is
I am
cold.
cold. And
I'll take care of that.
And I was definitely doing a lot of listening. So a little bit on my end as far as marketing, advertising, some of the things I deal with, with the newspaper that me and Kyle and Russell Johnson own, my promotions division, which I just kind of started over the past probably 2 months doing merchandising and stuff like that. We're dealing a lot with supply chains, and I listen to you guys, and I know there's certain things with you guys that you may see, especially Scott, with real estate and even with home building. There's still shortages of builders that can't finish out somebody's home because they can't get hardware for cabinets, that type of thing. Yeah. What I'm seeing a lot, especially on the printing side of the business that I do, is paper shortages. You got one of the major distributors in the United States, especially the West Coast, that they put out an announcement about 2 months ago that they're no longer delivering paper west of Mississippi. they just can't afford to do it. So there's a lot of paper shortages and stuff like that. And on the supply thing, I mean, there was one, I got a customer that wanted large blue T-shirts, and one of the largest suppliers in the United States said, no, like maybe next week, next month. Yeah, we don't know. And so, I mean, it's stuff like that's kind of drying up on us a little bit. So I think some people I talk to only kind of see that getting worse before that gets better. So
yeah, I think there's some things coming up. I know that the LA and San Pedro port, the longshoreman contract is up, I believe, maybe the end of June, July. Don't quote me on that, but it's coming up here in the next couple months. And I know there's a lot of talk about possible renegotiation, strikes, antics, things that could cause additional supply chain constraints. And then there's just the random things that you just can't predict right now coming out of the last couple of years that continue to plague every industry, right? Yeah. You just cannot predict what will be in shortage next. Baby formula, right, has been in the news the last couple of months.
Yeah, it's some of the simpler things that we don't even think of in our daily life that's like, nope, that's now being impacted. So
yeah.
Yeah, I think, we've been talking about the harbor issues and the imported product issue, but just like I was mentioning, the fuel cost, the delivery cost to get it from the harbor to the consumer.
That's one reason why the one company won't deliver west of Mississippi. It's simply fuel costs.
And the trucking industry is hurting for young blood. Mm-hmm. That industry is really hurting. So there's not a lot of young people wanting to be coming to the trucking industry. And when you drive to LA, which I did yesterday, you get behind these big rigs and they got these big banners. We're hiring. Here's what we pay: $180,000 for team drivers. Yeah. That's a pretty good deal if you like to drive. Is. Not for me, but yeah. But again, fuel's $9 a gallon. It's outrageous. So you start realizing, well, that's why that stuff costs so much.
Yeah, I think right now, if you are ambitious, unemployed, or partially employed but ambitious and interested and educated, or want to get educated and get into something, I mean, I can't think of a better time. I think everybody is hiring. Everybody is looking for that labor, that manpower that we need to show up to work every day, be reliable, do a good job, promote. I think it's a great opportunity right now.
In my industry, Scott, they call it the Great Resignation. And, I read unemployment rates just like you guys do and gals, and they're pretty low. And it doesn't make sense because everyone's looking for people. But the reality is those are new claims is what they're tracking, not people that's already on the dime, riding it out to the sunset.
Well, the formula for unemployment, if you're not actively looking for a job, you're not counted as unemployed.
Yeah, that's kind of convenient in that stat, isn't it,
so,
Amanda?
Yeah. I have an economics major, actually, and every time we had to calculate unemployment, I was just like, what? Like, this makes no sense. So, yeah, we're seeing low unemployment, but it's just because people have given up. They don't want to work. They don't want the long hours. They don't like the culture of the work anymore. Expenses and overhead for business. I mean, it's a lot of money to offer health insurance and 401k plans and IRA plans. And when you have state regulations mandating that you have to do that, especially it's crazy that it's 5 employees or more. And with all these COVID regulations on having to offer sick time and all these other things, I mean, for an employer, it's so hard to keep up. And then you have inflation, and I think it's a silent beast, and I don't think our unemployment rate is really at what it is. And I do think we're already in a recession. We just haven't seen the worst of it yet.
Yeah, and I think those numbers will come out. More government numbers that sometimes suspect as far as how those calculations get made. Guys, this has been a great roundtable. Dave, Kyle, Troy, John, Amanda, thank you guys all. Listeners, you can definitely reach out to any one of us. Our contact information is in the show notes. If you want to reach out after the show, ask more questions, and get in touch with us about anything. We appreciate your listenership. Thank you.
This show has been brought to you by the Law Office of Kyle Jones, Troy Burton with the Lynn Company, CPA John Duffield, Scott Hanson Real Estate Lender, broker and investor, and Dave Plivelich, President and CEO of the Marcom Group and MarcomBranding.com. You've been listening to the Our 2 Cents podcast. Check out the show notes for links and more information about the show. Also visit our website at our2centspodcast.com or catch us on Instagram at Our 2 Cents Podcasts. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and share with others.